I'm District Attorney Glenn Funk.
I am Assistant District Attorney Jan Norman.
I'm Assistant District Attorney Ronald Dowdy.
And I'm Deputy District Attorney Roger Moore.
The results of this trial demonstrate that violent crime will not be tolerated and will not be excused. The hearing yesterday, that concluded yesterday, was about guilt or innocence. The hearing today was really about what the proper punishment should be. Should Travis Reinking ever have a chance to be released in the future? None of us want our kids at some point in the future to go to a Waffle House when Travis Reinking was on the loose. Fortunately, the decision by the jury today ensures that that will not happen, and we thank this jury for their efforts at ensuring public safety. I want to make sure that before we really do anything, though, just as we've done in court all week, is we start by talking about the fact that this case is really about the victims in this case. It's about Joe Perez. It's about Torian Sanderlin. It's about Aquila Da Silva. It's about D'Ebony Groves. It's about the 4 victims that were shot that day, but luckily survived. It's about James Shaw Jr., Kayla Shaw. It's about Sharita Henderson. And it's about Tia Wagner. It's also about the 14 people in the Waffle House that fortunately were not shot, were not killed, but still bear the scars of what happened that day. I want to thank the families of all of these folks, because without their courage, their dedication, their perseverance, their character, we could not have achieved justice in this case, and we could not have had this verdict today that which will ultimately make Nashville safer. I also want to thank the Metro Nashville Police Department, whose efforts to arrest Travis Reinking, to apprehend him, to investigate the case, to provide the proof necessary, was not only courageous, but took a tremendous amount of professionalism and expertise and provided the proof that this jury needed to convict. I want to thank the first responders, because without them, Tia and Sharita probably would have died on the scene. I want to thank the people in Nashville who called in tips that helped the police locate Mr. Reinking as quickly as we could before he could cause any other injuries or deaths, because he was armed even while he was on the run. Obviously, I'd like to thank these jurors who put themselves through a very intense and emotional week, who listened to the facts of this case and came to a brave decision, 2 brave decisions. And Judge Fishburne and his court staff for the extra hours that they put in and for their consistently excellent work. Now, the folks that are standing here with me have been working for 4 years to make sure that we could put forth the evidence necessary to achieve this verdict and succeed in our mission of public safety. They've all 3 put in hundreds of hours of work. All 4 of us went and visited folks in the hospital, met with the family early in 2018, and have been working on this pretty much as a top priority case. I cannot thank them enough. Our victim witness coordinator, Brittany Leduc, who has also been working with these families and with this team, have been instrumental in getting us to this point. I am extremely gratified by the fact that the jury accepted the position that this team put forth It's never a happy day when somebody goes to prison, especially prison for life without parole. We cannot bring these victims back to life or erase the scars that will always be borne by these families. But to seek justice and to make sure that even in this tragedy there is some long-term good is important for Nashville, because the deterrent value of this case, this prosecution, this conviction, this sentence will be significant and will in fact make us safer. With that, any of the four of us will take any questions.
Well, you were talking about how your team has worked on this over the years. How hard was this? I know y'all see a lot of probably challenging cases, but how hard was this going through the disturbing details, and how'd y'all just kind of work through that with a tough case like this?
All right. What made this case especially difficult was the fact that the facts of this case were so horrendous and so gruesome that you may have noticed even the police officers that were working the scene had trouble stomaching what they had to witness. It's always difficult when there are this level of injuries and we're trying to minister to the families of the victims. It's tough to properly minister to folks while they're still in the hospital enduring 15 to 25 surgeries after their legs essentially got blown off. Factually, this was difficult to put together, but also legally it was difficult to put together. This was a situation where Mr. Reinking has a severe mental health issue, no doubt, but it was not so severe that he did not appreciate the wrongfulness of what he was doing at the time. He appreciated the wrongfulness as he thought about it for at least a year, as he wrote about it even prior to this, as he did it, and as he then tried to elude capture for it. So those parts were difficult. But all of us, as we worked through this case, had some slightly different reactions. And Jan, if you could answer that question too, from your perspective.
Which I guess, can you repeat the question?
I was just kind of asking you, there's a lot of disturbing details of this case. You all have been obviously working on it for years. I was just kind of asking him, how do you work through something like that with kind of the details of the case, and just how do you kind of process that?
Well, I think the focus ends up being on the victims. We had so many victims that were still living. I haven't had a case that I've worked where there were 18 other people that were survivors. So I feel like focusing on that and focusing on Shantia and Sharita and the strength that those two women have to overcome the injuries that they received, which were so horrific. But every time that we got to meet with them, I feel like that kind of built us back up to make it easier to push on and push through the process that we were going through.
As prosecutors, we are supposed to look at the case, dispassionately. What are the facts? Make sure that it fits the law. But when you're meeting with families, with victims who have gone through so much, it's impossible not as a human to feel their pain. And so there have been many times in which after we've walked out of a room, we've shed tears, where we've had to hug one another. But that just made it very clear to us how much harder we needed to make sure we were going to fight to make sure that they got justice. And so that's why it was okay for us to spend so many hours as a team working on this case away from our loved ones and stay up so late and get up so early. And so they deserved it.
Do you know if there was
No.
some context for the magnitude of this trial? Is there a case you can remember in recent history or ever in Davidson County that you've tried a mass murder of this size?
Every case is different. The Paul Reed case from the late 1990s, he was a mass murderer, but he killed for robbery people at Captain D's and McDonald's and in Clarksville. So he had a total of 7, but they were spread out over 3 different crime scenes. The Burnett Chapel shooting, which occurred almost a year before this to the day, was a mass shooting where, but for the grace of God, only one person was killed. That was one too many, obviously, but there were some 40 or 50 churchgoers there. So for the sense of people who do this are very few and far between, thank goodness, but in the sense of working with those cases and working with them, the amount of time that you have to put into it is tremendous, but the reward of being able to fill out the judgment form that I did this morning and check that guilty and life without parole makes it all worthwhile. But this case was unique, and the families made it even more so by just how resilient they were, how loving. They have become a family themselves, and we're just, I think, blessed to, be considered to be a small part of that family, and we would do anything for them. And we're just so grateful that the jury essentially felt the same way by their verdict.
And to follow up for you, Roger, there was a moment in your closing that seemed like you were almost getting emotional. What touched you there?
Pardon me? My baby girl, I have one. She's 29, but I could see and feel that loss and could not imagine what they were going through. But she's well, she's safe, she's probably watching right now. But yeah, it's feeling that, being a parent, and the such senseless loss of such great young people who had their future. I mean, you've seen about what they did, what they could have been. The great people, the leaders in Nashville, those are the people that we want to praise and hold up. And it was a privilege to do it for them and for their families.
I think there's no question that the mass murder that Mr. Ryan King is now convicted of is awful. The testimony that we heard today from the victims' families was absolutely heartbreaking. Is there something more to say today about mental illness?
Travis Ryan King was prosecuted for his acts. He had a mental illness. We all acknowledge that. He was not prosecuted because he had a mental illness. And the levels of care and treatment, I think General Funk would be good to speak about just what resources there are and what is being done in Nashville.
All right, we've got a real focus in the criminal justice system on mental health issues. We know that that's been an unaddressed problem for a number of years. And so as a city, we have taken some tremendous strides with regards to saying, okay, if the criminal justice system is going to put mental health cases in front of us, how are we going to properly address that? Sheriff Hall says that the largest mental health facility in the county is the county jail. So what we have done as a city, our police department now is rolling out. We've got 2 precincts that are already online. We're going to have another 2 within the next couple of weeks, and ultimately all 8 precincts within the next 6 months. We'll have some rapid response if there's a mental health issue that might not need to lead to an arrest. We have also invested millions of dollars into a behavioral care center for folks that are arrested on lower level nonviolent crimes to be able to have those cases diverted with actual inpatient mental health treatment that lasts between 7 and 30 days right across the street from where we're standing right here. And that's kind of the gold standard across the country. Other cities have come to Nashville to study what we're doing as far as diverting mental health issues. In fact, Portland is coming. Most of their elected officials will be here in April to study what our office is doing, what the Sheriff's Department's doing, what the Public Defender here is doing. Above that, for folks that have more serious mental health issues, Judge Melissa Blackburn has been working very hard. She's got some of the top mental health courts in the entire state. She's not only has a mental health court that meets 4 days a week, but she has a veterans court to deal with mental health issues amongst our veterans. And that's all great. The problem is still what happens if someone has an unaddressed mental health issue that causes them to commit a more serious crime, or what happens when someone commits a serious crime and then tries to have that serious crime excused because they have a mental health issue, right? Some people are in fact found not guilty by reason of insanity. Other folks, though, are using that for an excuse, and as long as they can actually appreciate the wrongfulness of their behavior, or if they have such severe mental health issues that they do not even appreciate the nature of their conduct, then those folks end up in a secure mental institution until the doctors decide if and when they're able to be released. But there are still a lot of cases where folks that have mental health issues do not have such severe mental health issues. They might be severe, but they're not so severe, as in this case. If they have a mental health issue, but they still appreciate wrongfulness, and they still do it anyway, part of the problem here is, in this case, Mr. Reinking had planned this out. He'd gotten the 3 30 bullet clips. He'd talked about in his journals that he wanted to do a mass shooting, right? And then he comes out and he shoots a bunch of innocent people. And not only does he do that with regard to shooting innocent people at a time when he knows that it's wrong. I mean, he said, this is evil. This is going to make me feel unclean. He knew it before he got in the car. He knew it when he was in the car. He knew it when he parked outside, and he knew it when he went in there and he shot all 30 rounds. Right? So, he did it, and then he tries to say, well, this is self-defense because my toilet seat was up, right? Or this is self-defense because life's not treated me well. Even worse, he tries another excuse, right? Another excuse he tries to say is, well, God told me to do this, right? You cannot take the Lord's name in vain. You can't say that God told you to commit a mass murder, right? You can't just make that up in an effort to try to get out and be found blameless for the fact that you decided to murder 4 people. You actually decided to murder a lot more than 4 people, but you only actually murdered 4 people. Critically wound 2 others, almost kill everybody. That's not the type of behavior that is contemplated when the legislature puts not guilty by reason of insanity on the books, right? The folks that can understand what they're doing is wrong have to be held accountable. That's what this jury did.
General, as a follow-up, why did you not seek the death penalty in this case?
3 reasons. Number one, our nation is moving toward a place where you cannot execute a child, right? You cannot execute somebody with a cognitive delay. We've always taken the position that you should not execute somebody with a severe mental health issue. Secondly, we met with every one of these families, right? What sentence would you like on behalf of the family, right? And some of them did ask us to seek the death penalty, but not all of them. And if some of them did not want the death penalty for their own reasons, whether it's personal, religious, whatever, really needed to be unanimous for even to consider it. And then lastly, the government, the district attorney's office, the criminal justice system really should be about promoting an understanding as to the sanctity of life. Right? Mr. Reinking did not appreciate the sanctity of life. Right? Some of these families felt like it was not appropriate, and there's no question that he had a mental health issue. For all those reasons, we decided not to seek the death penalty, but we did want to make sure that Mr. Reinking would never be able to hurt anybody else, which is why we sought and ultimately achieved a sentence of life without parole.
General, procedurally, this case was different. The defense mounted a more active defense, what you're used to in a prosecution case. Insanity pleas are rare. I think the Reed case may have involved one. That was a long time ago. It didn't get to a jury trial with it. How does that change your case and your approach to something like this?
With regards to what?
That there was an insanity plea here.
Right. There was no question but that Mr. Reinking was guilty. 0. He's on videotape, right? Some survivors were able to identify him and say that's the guy that did it. There's no question. Really, they did not have a defense other than self-defense, but the video itself would have demonstrated that that was not a legitimate defense, which put them in a position where they had to go with an insanity defense. And they did have these doctors who said that there were some issues with regards to whether he could appreciate the wrongfulness, right? They even said at some points that they believed that he could not appreciate the wrongfulness. But we had talked to them, and we knew that their answers were going to be consistent, that, well, yes, because of this and this, perhaps he did appreciate the wrongfulness. I think even Dr. Eisen said, well, yes, he did appreciate the wrongfulness when it came to this act or this part of the commission of this offense. So we knew that while there were some parts of the doctor's presentation were going to indicate something consistent with the defense, that he should be found not guilty by reason of insanity, we also knew that on cross-examination we were going to be able to establish that he actually did understand the wrongfulness of his actions. And I think that was very expertly brought out by General Dowdy and General Norman, because they knew those reports backwards and forwards. They'd talked to these doctors. They knew that the reality was, by the time they got off that stand, they would have essentially conceded our point that he knew what he was doing and that he knew that it was wrong.
You said you had spoken with the families. What are some of the things that you would tell them as you went through the trial, or even to prepare them leading up to verdict?
Right. We tried to make sure that the families understood not only the facts and the law with regards to this case, made sure that they would understand the criminal procedures, the procedures in court, the way that the case would lay out. My experience with families indicates that the more they know about what's going to happen, even though we cannot tell them for sure what the verdict is going to be or what the sentence is going to be, that empowers them to a large extent. And there was a lot of times when we were depending upon them for strength, and they were sometimes depending on us, not only for that information, but for that assurance that we were going to get through this together. Jan, you want to talk about some about your interactions with the family?
I mean, our interactions with the family, I hate to give this answer, but it kind of gets personal because we got to know them as people. I know tons of things about their own lives and things that are outside of this case where you develop almost a friendship and bond with them. So I feel blessed to have had the opportunity to do that and to get to know so many of them so much better.
Do you think there was one piece of evidence or specific testimony that really hammered home to the jury your position that he did appreciate the wrongfulness of his conduct?
I think it's Travis Reinking's own words. I mean, the fact that he wrote those journals in jail describing in graphic detail the horrific murders that he carried out, and his own words proved that he understood the wrongfulness, which I don't know where we would be if we didn't have that evidence, but we ended up having a large volume of his own words describing exactly what he did when he talked to the doctors, when he told them what he did and what he was thinking and how he was feeling. That proved that he understood the wrongfulness when he committed those murders.
Final thought for the victims or the Ranking family, just from y'all's perspective? Like a message to them?
We're going to be stepping downstairs to talk to the victims' families right now. And obviously we're going to have one more hearing in this case, a sentencing hearing, hopefully in early May. But mainly it's just love, appreciation, and support, because we cannot thank them enough for everything that they've done to support us as we have gone through this, and make sure that they do what they can to make sure that Nashville's a safer place.